Before I call the next member, I am going to remind the member who's just spoken and other members of Speaker's ruling 53.4. I think the member has now been here for nearly 4 years, and I think the exemption that's allowed to new members or ministers introducing technical bills no longer applies to him. He actually spoke for about 3 minutes without reading a speech and then appeared to revert to that and just want to reinforce the rulings that have been given by other people in this chair and to remind people to have a look at 53.4. Pēnei Hinara.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker, and can I take the opportunity to pick up on the words of my esteemed colleague, the Honourable Phil Goff, in his mention of serious sexual assaults, and I want to acknowledge our colleague Calvin Davis, who in his absence I stand and speak this evening, and I want to acknowledge his efforts in this field and his hikoi to the far north, Mr. Speaker. So I rise to take a call on the first reading of the Electronic Monitoring of Offenders legislation bill. And can I take the time to point out that Labour supports this bill. We support it to go to the Select Committee stage, where I hope, and I will certainly be encouraging, robust debate on this bill to ensure that all people, from researchers, advocates, perpetrators and victims of crime, find voice on such an important topic to all New Zealanders. We hope that this bill, Mr. Speaker, after going through a robust democratic process, will enable electronic monitoring conditions to be imposed on those being released into intensive supervision or those who have served a sentence of imprisonment of 2 years or less. Mr. Speaker, it is the duty of a responsible government to ensure the safety of all New Zealanders. It is with that in mind, Mr. Speaker, that I want to commend the Minister. I want to commend the Minister and this bill. Can I pick up the point again, Mr. Speaker, of safety for all? Safety for all New Zealanders must be paramount. Therefore, a bill like this must consider victim at the forefront of all discussions, must consider the victim at the forefront of any rhetoric around such a bill, but it must also, Mr. Speaker, consider the perpetrator. And I'll pick up on that point again shortly. Naturally, Mr. Speaker, we all in this House want a system that is not only fair, but also punishes crimes accordingly. New Zealanders can also expect to be safe as they go about their daily business. I ask myself, when considering this bill, Mr. Speaker, what does a safe system look like? With the ever-growing and evolving technology in this world, one's mind only boggles when we consider the future. This isn't the first time I've spoken on a particular bill in this House in my short time here around just the advances of technology and the impact that has on crime, on victims moving forward. Therefore, I ask, well, what does a safe system look like? It's important that this country, and all the authorities are well equipped with the right technology. At this point, can I highlight just how past technology in this field changes? And if you'll indulge me, Mr. Speaker, I have a short news article here. And it's from Los Angeles, and it's only as old as last year, 2014. And it talks about this particular system being implemented over there. The report concedes widespread failures in their electronic monitoring of felons, in which probation deputies were deluged with meaningless alerts while offenders were untracked for days and weeks at a time. And now this is a big concern to myself. While we support this bill, we want a robust system that will make sure that felons and perpetrators do not fall through the cracks of surveillance and in the meantime go unaccounted for, and we can only imagine what they may get up to. I'll talk about a little body of research that was done that proves that this particular system deters further crime But this is a concern to myself when I think about the system that we're looking to implement or certainly legislate through this House, Mr. Speaker. The report goes on to say that it lost track of approximately 80 felons while they were on electronic monitoring in 2013 and 2014. 80 felons, Mr. Speaker. Now, while that may only be a drop in the bucket in California, 80 felons are a heck of a lot of people here in New Zealand. This, of course, as I've already pointed out, is a serious concern. However, he also pointed out in this report, Mr. Speaker, the inadequate or non-existent training and policies. And it's on this point I want to say, and I want to ask the Minister, and of course I'll be encouraging the debate as this bill progresses through the House, that technology is only one side of the equation. It's important that we have the manpower or the people power to ensure that the monitoring of felons or the monitoring of those who are under GPS monitoring is robust, it's sound and it's timely. I say timely, Mr. Speaker, because there's quite a point made this evening about how this GPS will allow pinpoint accuracy that is it's of benefit to those who are monitoring where the perpetrators or where those who are wearing the ankle bracelet might head to, because they're zoned. Now, according to this particular report, they've had trouble with the zoning of these particular GPS systems because as those who are let out under this type of surveillance or supervision model still are allowed to go out and about in their communities. And we know that the purpose of this bill is to ensure that, or one of the purposes of this bill is to ensure that those people who are under such supervision or under such surveillance don't or aren't tempted into recommitting a crime by going back into the area. And it reminds me of the old school adage, Mr. Speaker, that while we might pour all these fantastic things into a child, we just can't help what happens when they go home. And I say that because it's all fair and well to say that we're going to GPS monitor these people and we're going to make sure that its pinpoint accuracy will allow victims to feel safer within their communities. Well, as this particular report has highlighted, there are flaws in this system. There are flaws because why? Because technology is constantly changing and these criminals are getting smarter. They're getting smarter. We know that there are cases over the past decade since this type of monitoring has come into our country where just a simple tamper or some clever person is able to have is able to tamper with their ankle bracelet, and whether they escape the eyes of those supervising them for 1 hour or for 1 week, that's simply not good enough. However, it does go on in this particular report, Mr. Speaker, to talk about, while they acknowledge that the zoning of such GPS monitoring is a good thing, it must also be unique to each offender. How you do that exactly, I'm not too sure, but those are the challenges that we hope to flesh out as this debate and this bill progresses through the House, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, it is important that we get the system right to ensure that it not only is the technology up to date, as I've already mentioned, but also that we have the people power to be able to resource it. Mr. Speaker, to the other intent of this bill, I turn to the matter of rehabilitation. The Labour Party wants to see that proper measures that encourage rehabilitation and reintegration of offenders back into our public life is a commitment made by this government. To make sure that, as I've already mentioned, the child who we pour all the stuff into them at school and they go home and we just don't have any control over what happens outside of the walls of a prison, we want to make sure that this government makes a commitment to the proper reintegration of prisoners back into our communities. And while the member across might say that they've already done that, I invite her to come over to Wātea in my electorate, Mr. Speaker, where they are seriously underfunded in making sure that the prisoner reintegration models that are being proposed by this government are carried through. Mr. Speaker, there is indeed a body of research that supports that sex offenders monitored by GPS, says here, monitored by GPS, are found to commit fewer crimes. Now, if this is true, and the body of research certainly suggests that, then we on this side of the House will be supporting that. We think that's a great step forward, and like I said, if the research suggests it, then that's fantastic. This report, however, does advise caution. It advises that there exist limitations with the system, and I hope that through the Select Committee we can address these issues. I do hope, Mr. Speaker, that this bill is part of a wider strategy from this government in protecting all New Zealanders, while also showing some commitment from this government to the relevant programs for the reintegration of prisoners. Tēnā koe.
I call Todd Barclay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.